Operation Panzerfaust. Wow, sounds really heavy, yeah? Hey, wait, what does it actually involve? Kidnapping? But Panzerfaust. Who names these things? Ah, okay. October 21st, 1944. We've seen the Axis powers dwindle lately as Germany's war-making partners have left the war, changed sides, or just rebelled. I mean, Romania, Bulgaria, Finland, Slovakia. This week, pretty much the last one left tries to, Hungary, but it doesn't work. The Germans don't allow it, and Hungary remains in the war on the German side thanks to a German-engineered coup to oust Miklos Horthy. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, Allied forces began crossing the Rubicon in Italy. They also crossed the German and Hungarian borders. There was a crisis in Hungarian command and a crisis in Chinese-American command and loads of American raids on Japanese positions in Formosa and the Philippines that destroyed loads and loads of Japanese planes. This week, on the evening of October 15th, Tokyo Rose happily gloats across the airwaves. All of Admiral Mishra's carriers have been sunk tonight, instantly. The morning of the 16th, the Japanese awaken to news that they have won a second Pearl Harbor off Formosa, and the Emperor declares a public holiday, the first in over 2 years. The news is, of course, not true, but is just the face-saving response to the disaster of those raids that cost the Japanese hundreds of planes and pilots. It seems likely to Japanese command, and it is very much the case, that the Allies will hit the Philippines next. But the Japanese do have 250,000 men there, and they're also rushing more and more down there. The Japanese naval staff is also planning a final offensive to smash the American fleet once and for all, Operation Shogo. And Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's carrier force leaves Japan while other units assemble and refuel at Brunei. But importantly, those raids have literally halved the strength of the Japanese air forces. And on the 17th, by which time the Japanese know from where the Americans are coming, there are fewer than 100 operational planes actually in the Philippines. And also at this point, most of the Japanese pilots' combat experience comes from film simulators, since they don't have much fuel. That day, Takajiro Onishi arrives to command the air fleet in the coming battle. And he feels he has no choice but to order suicide strikes to make the most of his tiny force. The pilots who volunteer for one-way death strikes take the title kamikaze, named after the divine wind that scattered the Mongol invasion in 1281. Well, from the 16th to the 19th, the preliminaries for the landings on Leyte go off. The 16th, planes are sent from Biak, Sansapor, and Morotai against targets on Mindanao. These are from the 13th and 5th Air Forces. That same day, 18 escort carriers from Tom Sprague's Task Group 77.4 attack Leyte, Cebu, and Mindanao. They attack again the 17th, but that day are backed with 4 carriers from Ralph Davison's TG 38.4 who hit Luzon. There is also minesweeping in Leyte Gulf that day, and at the entrance to the Gulf, small U.S. Ranger units occupy Suluan and Dinagat. These are little islands. On the 18th, all those escort carriers focus on Leyte, but the full carriers, now 12 in number, keep hitting Luzon. The 19th, the Leyte attacks are still maintained, and that day the 5th Air Force hits Mindanao again. The Japanese lose planes again and again and again in both these attacks and with their own counterstrikes. On the 19th, what is left of them is concentrated in Onishi's 1st Air Fleet on Luzon. The 17th to the 19th in the Indian Ocean come diversionary attacks by the British Eastern Fleet on the Nicobar Islands, though they do not do much diverting. They do a bunch of damage, though, with attacks from 2 carriers the 17th and 19th, and shelling from a battle cruiser and smaller ships the 17th and 18th. And on the 20th come the landings on the east coast of Leyte. This is called A-Day to avoid any confusion with the famous D-Day. All those carriers and escort carriers and the 5th Air Force's land-based planes provide support. The landing ships are from Tom Kincaid's 7th Fleet, and it is Walter Kruger's 6th Army that lands 4 divisions from 2 corps. Franklin Siebert's 10th Corps, 1st Cavalry and 24th Infantry, lands south of Tacloban. John Hodge's 24th Corps, 96th and 7th Divisions, land around Dulag. They also have fire support from battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. Japanese 16th Division fights for a little on the beaches, but then retires to prepared positions to await reinforcements. And the beachheads are secured so quickly that Douglas MacArthur himself arrives on the scene for his iconic PR moment. At 2 p.m., he broadcasts over a garden of microphones, which is the correct collective noun for microphones. "People of the Philippines, I have returned," thus keeping his famous promise to the Philippines, "I shall return," from 2.5 years ago. But though the attackers take the Tacloban airfield, the Americans cannot link the beachheads this day, despite landing 132,000 men. Today, the 21st, they still can't link the beachheads, though they take Dulag Airfield and Tacloban Village. Speaking of American commanders, there's big news about one of them this week. The months-long struggle between Vinegar Joe Stilwell and Chiang Kai-shek is over. And October 19th, Stilwell is recalled from China. Chiang meets with him the next day, and they tell each other some niceties that seem pretty hypocritical. Chiang says he regrets all that has happened between them, and Stilwell says he only ever acted for the good of China. Chiang does offer Stilwell the highest award China has to offer a foreigner, the Grand Cordon of the Blue Sky and White Sun. But Stilwell declines. He will claim he told Chiang to stick it up his ass, but I cannot confirm that one way or the other. The feud between the two is kind of the public face of Chinese-American relations these days. But as Rana Mitter points out, it should not distract attention from the wider strategic decision that Marshall and the other Allied leaders had made at the start of the war. China was not going to be a major theater of war in the Allied effort. This was perfectly understandable, but it could hardly be expected that the Chinese should consider themselves expendable. By creating a fiction that Chiang had to fight to show his value to the alliance, the Allies allowed the relationship between the US and China to erode. Rather than trying repeatedly to take Burma, a target of dubious value, it would have been perfectly reasonable to let Chiang use his limited resources to defend China, even if, in publicity terms, it appeared that China was not playing an active role in the wider war effort. And of course, the often overly ambitious goals Chiang was made part of sure gave the impression that China's goals always took a backseat to those of the Allies. So by now, there's a lot of mistrust between the Chinese and the Americans. Speaking of the Americans, I'm going to backtrack to talk about the fight around Aachen and stuff I didn't really have time for last week, as you may remember me saying that I was going to do. We saw a couple weeks ago the beginning of the Allied attempt to break the German West Wall and encircle the city. On the 7th, U.S. 19th Corps entered Alsdorf as a step towards encirclement. Now, the 4 divisions of German 81st Corps are defending around here, some 18,000 men strong as of October 7th. They do have a lot of artillery, but only a dozen or so operational tanks. However, Gerd von Rundstedt has promised them major reinforcements to hold the city, which they certainly can't do for long without. But Corps Commander Friedrich Kochling is still waiting for the 166th and 3rd Panzer Grenadier Divisions, the reinforcements, on the 7th. At Alsdorf, 30th Division Commander Leland Hobbs thinks heading south to link up with 7th Corps coming north and isolate Aachen should take, worst case, a couple days. So he tells 7th Corps to get Clarence Hubner's 1st Division moving the morning of the 8th. This they do, and over 48 hours take their initial objectives. These are, however, ridges, and since the attacks are on limited fronts, German artillery really takes its toll the rest of the week. On the 10th, they take Haren, cutting one of 2 German supply routes into Aachen, and then they're ready to link up with 30th Division at the base of Ravel's Hill. Hubner thinks closing the ring is now basically a done deal, so he sends an ultimatum to the Aachen garrison commander. It expires 24 hours later, but already the 10th, the German reinforcements finally begin arriving, and the 14th, it becomes apparent to the Americans that the Germans may very well counterattack. That attack begins at 10 a.m. the 15th. It is a very strong attack and comes within an ace of success, but first artillery and then finally air support foils it for good. The 16th, the Germans attack again before the dawn, but this time just the infantry is enough to hold them back. But for over a week, units from 1st Division have held their positions waiting for the 30th Division to arrive and finish the encirclement of Aachen. As for 30th Division, well, the 9 days that it takes them to cover the 5-kilometer distance that's their task are bloody, bloody, and bloody. See, the area north and northeast of Aachen is urbanized coal mining country and very easily adaptable for defense. On the 8th, the 120th Infantry advances easily enough, but the 117th on their left is absolutely savaged, and German armor and infantry fight their way into Alsdorf, threatening to cut off the 117th southeast of the town. This is defeated, but Hobbs then reinforces the town in case of more attacks, weakening his offensive. His forces do take Badenburg, the 11th, but the 117th and 120th are now playing defense until their comrades can capture Würselen and get the gap closed. Reinforced with armor from the 2nd Armored Division, the 116th attacks the 13th, but even attacking for 3 days, no joy. A new attack is planned all across the lines for the 16th. This goes off that morning, and by 3:45 p.m., the 1st Division men at Ravel's Hill can see those of 30th Division south of Würselen, and at 4:15, they close the Aachen Gap. As for the city itself, which only now houses some 20,000 unevacuated of its 165,000 population, Hübner has only 2 battalions to assault the 5,000 men manning its defenses. He does, however, have overwhelming air power and artillery to batter the city into submission. And day by day, the battalions clear the smashed buildings of the city one at a time. Aachen surrenders at 12:05 on October 21st, the first large German city to fall into Allied hands, although it is very much a dead and ruined city, smashed beyond recognition. And to the northwest, the Allies are still active in the Netherlands. Okay, back on the 6th, Canadian 2nd Corps began the drive on the Breskens Pocket. This was part of the overall offensive to finally secure the port of Antwerp. They forced crossings of the Leopold Canal, and by mid-month have taken about half of the pocket. Meanwhile, Canadian 2nd Division takes Woensdrecht on the 16th. That day, 21st Army Group Commander Bernard Montgomery throws his full support behind the Battle of the Scheldt, and all other 2nd Army offensive operations are shut down, except those that will, in some way, assist in opening Antwerp. British 12th Corps takes over the eastern bits of the Canadians' lines and prepares to launch attacks near Hertogenbosch to try to clear the south bank of the Meuse, or Maas, River. With their lines now shortened, the Canadians can consolidate, and today the 21st, Breskens finally falls. The Allies make some gains in Italy too this week. On the 15th, 2nd New Zealand Division takes Gambetola, and the 20th, the 4th and 46th Divisions from British 5th Corps take Cesena. But since Allied command has by now realized there's not going to be a big breakthrough here, Harold Alexander decides that 8th Army operations will shut down for the winter November 15th. Mark Clark's U.S. 5th Army drive on Imola is also called off after progress is halted this week, but his other forces are slowly still advancing on Bologna. But if those attacks are ending, there are new ones beginning over on the Eastern Front. Yep, new Soviet attacks up in Latvia, Lithuania, and East Prussia this week. Okay, after completing the isolation of Army Group North last week, Stavka made new plans to continue the fight. Andrei Yeremenko's 2nd Baltic Front will attack to the west from the Dobela area. Ivan Bagramian's 1st Baltic Front will attack north towards Liepaja and Skrunda and try to destroy the mass of German divisions trapped in Courland. He also, though, has flank armies heading for the Niemen River and eventually Memel, so they can thwart any German attempts to somehow link up with the Courland units. Ivan Cherniakovsky's 3rd Belarusian Front will attack west and try to reach the Gombinen-Goldap line and directly threaten East Prussia itself. Well, the morning of the 16th, the three fronts go into action. First Shock Army, on Yeremenko's right, makes the most headway at first, taking Kemeri by the 18th. But once they get closer to Tukums, they get completely stopped by the defenses there. And actually, the whole front gets stopped by the German defenses in all of the bogs and the marshes around here. As for Bagramian, attacks towards Liepaja meet very heavy resistance, particularly coming from masses of German armor. So they don't break through. It's also slow going towards Memel. Cherniakovsky does make some real headway though, breaking through two German defensive lines and taking Golda. But his force cannot break the line from Angarab to Gumbinen to Pilkallen. The only way really through seems to be a head-on charge at Gumbinen, and that's not really possible. So spoiler, all of these attacks up here continue next week, but none of them makes any headway, and they are all called off towards the end of the month. Further to the south, you may not have realized it, but all four Soviet-Ukrainian fronts are working at once on what is a large combined offensive towards Slovakia, Hungary, and Yugoslavia. The left flank of 1st Ukrainian and 4th Ukrainian are fighting towards Uzhhorod, most of 2nd in the Debrecen operation in Hungary, the left of 2nd and also 3rd in the Belgrade operation, and all the fighting we've seen in Yugoslavia. Meanwhile, the threat of Soviet invasion was enough to throw the Hungarian political and military leadership into a turmoil, though the Germans had learned enough from the Romanian defection and the Bulgarian debacle to act more speedily in Hungary, instigating their own coup this time and making use of a much stronger local pro-Nazi element. Well, German troops have been in Budapest since March, as you may remember, when they installed the very pliable and amenable Domostoye government. But Regent Miklos Horthy dismissed him August 29th, inspired by Romania changing sides. Geza Lakatos became the new prime minister. Horthy, no fool, was well aware that letting Germany down, which that did, usually prompted some sort of response. And he eventually negotiated an armistice with the Soviets, the draft of which I mentioned last week. And Soviet troops are already across the border and fighting in Hungary, though Horthy said, when accepting the armistice terms, that the Soviets should stop military actions in Hungary long enough for his people to carry out the terms. This was agreed to, but the Germans jumped the gun. See, they have the fanatically pro-Nazi Ferenc Szalasi waiting in the wings, and have Hungarian SS chief Otto Winkelmann and general fixer Otto Skorzeny ready to basically eliminate anyone that needs to be eliminated, which begins with kidnapping a field marshal already the 10th. What follows is called both Aktion Horthy and Operation Panzerfaust. Now, the SD has plans to kidnap Horthy's son, also named Miklos, whom they suspect of trying to make a deal with Yugoslav Marshal Tito. They're going to do this by impersonating people in Tito's staff, setting up a meeting with the younger Horthy, and then once they have him, they can use him to pressure the elder Horthy to stay in the war with Germany. Well, he agrees to the meeting the 15th, but is suspicious enough to bring Hungarian troops with him. It turns into a shootout between the SD and the Hungarians, though Skorzeny's guys do manage to grab Miklos Jr. and get him away. Radio Budapest broadcasts news of the armistice that afternoon, though by then it is a solo Horthy affair since the Lakatos cabinet resigns because they say they can't approve an armistice that they and Parliament were not consulted on. And with Tiger tanks in the city, Winkelmann and Skorzeny set about taking it over. The morning of the 16th, Horthy says he's willing to abdicate. Later in his memoirs, he says he does this to spare his son's life, though he doesn't seem super worried about his son to those actually present that day. But the Szalasi government is installed, and it looks like Budapest might kind of soon become the focus of a ferocious German defense. Some Hungarian officers just give up though, with two generals going over to the Soviets within days of the coup. Horthy requests asylum in Germany, and his last official act of government is appointing Szalasi, who declares himself Nador, leader or Führer of Hungary, and in addition to being prime minister, claims all the rights and duties of Prince Regent as well. The Soviets are still advancing in Hungary to heavy resistance, but advancing nevertheless, taking Debrecen, the 20th. Now, north of Debrecen, Ivan Petrov's 4th Ukrainian Front has been trying to fight its way into Slovakia lately. 1st Guards, 18th, and 38th Armies. They have been moving at a crawl and taking tens of thousands of casualties over the weeks. But though 1st Guards and 38th do not gain much ground, they have caused a huge amount of German and Hungarian force to be deployed against them, which means there suddenly is not a whole lot of force facing Petrov's left wing. He sets up a mobile group, and they strike towards Mukachevo and Uzhhorod. Something important here. I talked recently about the Germans wanting to crush free Slovakia as soon as possible. Well, the Hungarian coup makes that a lot easier. For now, German troops can attack from Hungary into Slovakia, and the southern Slovakian border is suddenly anything but quiet. After the 18th of October, German troops closed in on Slovakia from all sides, striking from 11 points on the perimeter. Among the new arrivals in Slovakia was the Dirlewanger Brigade, fresh from the butchery of Warsaw and eager for further anti-partisan operations. The Horst Wessel Panzer Grenadier SS Division moved from reserve to the south for a strike towards Telgard, Banka Bystrica, Zwolenska Slatina, and Zvolen. While to the north, a Waffen-SS division took over the Kampfgruppe Schäfer. These fresh German troops struck into rebel territory between the 18th and 20th of October, leaving everywhere a trail of burning villages, mass graves, or cowed civilians awaiting transportation to the concentration camps. Other than in the Tatras, the Slovaks cannot seem to stop the Germans, and the week ends with them closing in on all centers of resistance. In Yugoslavia, though, one center of German resistance is neutralized this week. Fyodor Tolbukhin's 3rd Ukrainian Front forces entered Belgrade as last week ended. He has ordered his men to not use their heavy weapons to blast their way through the buildings of the city. So the fighting is often at close quarters, and the enemy must be cleared block by block. A full 7 battalions of sappers follow the fighting, and their job is to clear the buildings of all the many thousands of mines and booby traps the Germans have left behind. The idea behind all this is so the Yugoslav military and civil authorities will hopefully be able to move right into the still intact buildings. On the 19th, the Danube flotilla takes the island of Ratno, which cuts off the possibility of a major escape route on either the Sava or the Danube. They're also pouring their naval fire into German strongpoints. On the 20th, the Yugoslavian 1st Proletarian Division fights its way into Kalemegdan, the mighty ancient fortress. First, the Yugoslav forces clear it of Germans, then the sappers come in and clear it of mines. Then Soviet 4th Guards Mechanized Corps Commander Vladimir Zhdanov and Yugoslav partisan commander Peko Dapchevich meet up there to celebrate the victory over their enemy. German units are trying to fall back across the Sava to maybe make it to Zemun and break out to the west, but that's not going to work. The Red Air Force is hitting anything there hard, and tomorrow the Soviets and Yugoslavs will take Zemun. Down south at Kragujevac, German resistance finally falls apart today as the week ends. They've been desperately fighting to hold the Soviets, Bulgarians, and Yugoslavs away from the Sarajevo-Kraljevo road, the last way out for the German divisions heading north from Greece. Heck, as the week ends, the Bulgarians are in Niš and Belgrade has fallen. The Morava valleys are basically closed to the Germans. So Army Group E coming north really only has that road from Skopje to Sarajevo, and Kraljevo is the key at the moment. Army Group Commander Alexander Lohr knows that the loss of this road meant catastrophe for the men under his command. To shunt them into the mountains of Albania and Montenegro meant almost certain death with winter fast coming on. Kraljevo had to be defended to the limit of German exertions. Kraljevo had become the German Schwerpunkt. Lohr manages to fly a couple battalions there from Rhodes and Salonika, and Friedrich Müller takes charge of the defense there. That's going to be tough to hold, although to be fair, this is not the main axis of the Soviet advance. And that is the week. with Belgrade liberated, Stilwell recalled from China, and Horthy's fall from power, failed offensives in the Baltics, landings on Leyte, things cooling down in Italy, but things still sure hot on the Western Front. And a German city, a big one, falling into Allied hands. Wow. I mean, it's been just demolished. It's unrecognizable as a city, really, just, blasted apart. Hey. Here's a quote about Aachen from Charles MacDonald's The Siegfried Line. The ironic truth of a prophecy which Hitler had made early in his career was nowhere more evident than on the 21st of October 1944 in Aachen, the first large German city lost in the war. Give me 5 years, and you will not recognize Germany again. Pretty prophetic. But however many more years this war lasts, I'll be there to cover it, thanks to the Time Ghost Army. And you can join the Army and be part of this adventure at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. These are the newest Army officers. The Army member of the week is Valerie Maiskevich, I think. Well, Valerie anyway, right? Thanks, Valerie. Oh, and you can click here for a Between Two Wars episode about Hungary before this whole mess started. And do not forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.